Picture this, a quiet mountain retreat, nestled among whispering pines, a place where the air smells of freedom and memories linger like old photographs. That's the vacation home Tom Bennett bought, a gift for his aging parents to savor their golden years. But peace? That's a luxury Tom's family doesn't deal in. Not when his sisters, Claire and Julia, catch wind of anything they can turn into a paycheck. The trouble started brewing on a humid summer afternoon, when the sisters and their husbands, Mark and Greg, hatched a plan to rent out Tom's sanctuary for profit. "It's just sitting there," Claire had whined over the phone, her voice sharp as a mosquito's hum. Tom shut it down fast, said no. End of story. But with this family, no is just the opening bell for a fight. Tom Bennett wasn't your average pushover, a man in his 40s. He'd built a solid life with his wife, Laura, no kids, no chaos, just the kind of calm that comes with smart investments and a knack for dodging drama. The vacation home wasn't even for him. He'd handed it over to his folks, a generous nod to their dreams of mountain sunsets. But Claire and Julia? They saw dollar signs where Tom saw sentiment. Older by 8 and 10 years, the sisters had always lived louder than him. Stay-at-home moms with husbands who raked in decent cash, though you'd never know it from their constant griping. Mark, with his boasting swagger, and Greg, with his truck logo tattoo, weren't Tom's kind of people. Oil and water, that's what they were. And yet, here they were, clawing at his goodwill like it was their birthright. That summer day, trouble didn't just knock, it kicked the door down. Tom's parents, ever the social butterflies, decided to throw a barbecue at their suburban sprawl. Not just any barbecue, a fake 4th of July, complete with fluttering flags, red, white, and blue bunting, and a margarita machine humming in the corner. They'd planned it for the real holiday, but Claire's family had jetted off somewhere, so this was the do-over. Tom groaned when he heard. "Another circus," he muttered to Laura, who flashed her usual sunny smile. She was the optimist, the one who could stomach his sister's nonsense longer than he ever could. He wanted to skip it. Why wade through that mess? But his mom worked her magic on Laura, guilt dripping through the phone like syrup. "Just a quick visit," Laura promised, tugging him along. When they pulled up, the scene was already teetering on chaos. 20 folks milled around the backyard, neighbors mostly, gray-haired and chatty, the kind who'd seen decades of these shindigs. The air buzzed with laughter and the sizzle of burgers, but Tom's eyes landed on Claire and Julia first. They were sprawled by the pool, margarita glasses in hand, their voices loud and sloppy from too much tequila. Mark and Greg weren't far behind, red-faced and swaggering, beers sloshing as they traded boasts. The kids, 5 of them, ages 7 to 11, darted around like wild things, shrieking and unsupervised. Tom's mom darted after them, a frazzled shepherd to a flock of tiny terrors, while his dad, well, he'd claimed the whirlpool corner of the pool, a cooler of beers bobbing beside him, watching the madness unfold with a grin. Typical. Tom and Laura edged in, nodding at familiar faces, grabbing plates of food and a couple of icy drinks. They kept it light, small talk about the weather, the ribs, anything but family. But Claire spotted them, her eyes narrowing like a hawk's. "Late again?" "Huh?" she slurred, jabbing a finger. Julia chimed in. "And no swimsuits? You're killing the vibe." "Tom." Mark laughed too loud. Greg muttered something about fancy trips they couldn't afford. Tom clenched his jaw, tasting the old bitterness. Envy. It hung off them like cheap cologne. They resented his quiet life, his freedom, the way he and Laura built something without drowning in kid clutter. And now, they wanted his vacation home too? He shot Laura a look. "Let's get out soon." But the storm was already rolling in, and they hadn't seen the half of it yet. Hey, if this hooks you, stick around for the chaos ahead. Hit that like button, share with your friends, and subscribe to Heartstories for more family tales that hit hard. You won't want to miss what's next. The sun hung low over the suburban backyard, casting long shadows across the pool as the fake 4th of July barbecue churned on. Tom Bennett leaned against a patio chair, sipping his margarita, the ice clinking like a faint warning. He'd hoped to keep things civil, just nod, eat, and slip away before the inevitable fireworks of family nonsense lit up. Laura, ever the peacemaker, flitted between neighbors, her laugh a soft anchor in the growing racket. But peace wasn't on the menu that day, not with Claire and Julia holding court by the poolside, their voices cutting through the chatter like rusty saws, soaked in tequila and spite. Mark and Greg lounged nearby, their beer cans multiplying, their grins sloppy and loud. The air smelled of grilled meat and trouble, and Tom felt it creeping closer with every passing minute. The kids, 5 little tornadoes aged 7 to 11, were the first spark. They tore through the yard like unleashed hounds, barefoot and wild, their swimsuits dripping from earlier dips. Tom's mom darted after them, her apron flapping, her voice a strained plea. Slow down, please. She was no match for their chaos. Dad, meanwhile, stayed planted in his whirlpool throne, a beer in hand, his eyes half closed as if he'd seen this circus 100 times before. Tom almost envied him. Retreat looked tempting. But then Claire's voice sliced through. Tom, you're just gonna stand there? Help her out. He didn't bite, just took another sip, letting the frost numb his tongue and his temper. Laura caught his eye, her look saying, stay cool. Easier said than done. It started with a stumble. 2 of the kids, Claire's 9-year-old and Julia's 10-year-old, barreled toward a neighbor lady chatting near the pool steps. She was a wiry thing, gray hair pulled tight, her sundress crisp and unsuspecting. With a shriek of glee, the kids shoved her forward. She teetered, arms flailing, and splashed in up to her waist before grabbing the railing. Half drenched, she hauled herself out, her face a mask of quiet fury. No yelling, no scene, just a march to the towel pile, a quick pat down, and a stiff exit through the gate. Claire cackled, spilling her drink. Oh, lighten up, she hollered after the woman. Mark roared with laughter. Greg slapped his knee, and Julia smirked like it was the funniest prank since the invention of whoopee cushions. Tom's stomach twisted. Laura whispered, that's not okay. But the sisters didn't hear or didn't care. The real storm hit minutes later. Tom stood a few feet from the water, swapping small talk with an old neighbor about lawnmowers. Safe, dull ground. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught movement, 3 kids charging straight at him, full speed, eyes glinting with mischief. The ringleader, Julia's 11-year-old, led the pack, her grin pure trouble. Tom wasn't about to be their next dunking trophy. With a quick sidestep, he dodged at the last second. The trio couldn't stop. Momentum sent them tumbling into the pool with a spectacular splash, their arms and legs pinwheeling. The crowd erupted in chuckles. Even Laura stifled a laugh behind her hand. Tom let a smirk slip. Served them right. But Claire and Julia didn't see the humor. They lurched up from their chairs, drinks sloshing, faces red with booze and rage. What the hell? Tom? Claire bellowed, staggering forward. They can't swim, Julia shrieked, pointing like he'd shoved them in himself. Tom blinked. Swimsuits? Pool party. And they couldn't swim? The kids thrashed, wailing like they'd been marooned at sea, though the water barely hit their chests. Mark splashed in, a drunken night in flip-flops, fishing for the kids while Greg fumbled at the edge, yelling nonsense about ruined phones. Turns out, 2 of the little geniuses had been filming their stunt with their parents' iPhones, now sunk treasures at the bottom of the deep end. The backyard turned into a shouting match. Claire stormed up to Tom, her breath a tequila fog. You nearly killed them. You should have jumped in, Julia joined the chorus. Why didn't you grab them? Those phones cost a fortune. Mark, dripping and furious, hauled the kids out, only to slip and belly flop back in trying to dive for the devices. Greg staggered over, jabbing a finger at Tom. You think you're better than us? Huh? Standing there all smug. The accusations flew wild. Tom was heartless, selfish, a lousy uncle. Laura stepped between them, her voice sharp now. They're your kids, watch them yourselves. But reason drowned in the noise. Guests shifted awkwardly, some slipping away, others gawking like it was a reality show. Tom held his ground, his voice low but steel hard. You let them run loose? Not me. If they'd gotten hurt, that's on you. Claire's eyes flared. Oh, you'd love that. Wouldn't you? Mr. Perfect with his fancy life. Julia spat. We're family, act like it. Mark, soaked and panting, growled something about Tom owing them new phones. Greg tripped over a chair, face planting into the grass mid-rant. It'd have been funny if it weren't so pathetic. Tom grabbed Laura's hand. We're done here, he muttered, steering her toward the car. Behind them, Claire's curses mingled with the kids' sobs, a sour symphony fading as they drove off. Back home, Laura sank into the couch. Her usual brightness dimmed. They hate us, don't they? She murmured. Tom nodded, staring out the window. Always have. And it's about to get worse. He wasn't wrong. The BBQ was just the prelude, a taste of the betrayal simmering beneath the surface, ready to spill over the mountainside they all claimed as theirs. The dust from the BBQ settled uneasily in Tom Bennett's mind as weeks trickled by. But the sting of that day clung like damp smoke. He and Laura had retreated to their quiet life, the kind built on steady choices and child-free calm, a stark contrast to the clamor of his sister's world. The vacation home, that mountain haven he'd gifted his parents, loomed in his thoughts. It was supposed to be a sanctuary, not a battleground. Yet Claire and Julia, with their husbands Mark and Greg in tow, couldn't let it rest. Their demands to rent it out for cash had been a splinter under Tom's skin, and though he'd shut them down, he knew they weren't the type to slink away quietly. They never were. Summer faded into fall, leaves turning crisp and gold across the mountain slopes. Tom's parents still used the place now and then, their laughter echoing through the pines as they'd always dreamed. Tom didn't mind, hell, he'd bought it for them, footing the taxes and upkeep without a second thought. But Claire and Julia saw it differently. To them, it was a goldmine going to waste, a ticket to pad their stretched wallets. They'd grumbled about it since the BBQ, their texts and calls a barrage of guilt trips and thinly veiled jabs. You're sitting on a fortune, Claire had snapped once, her voice crackling through the phone. Why hoard it? Tom deleted the messages, blocked the numbers. Laura sighed beside him, her patience fraying. They'll never stop, she murmured. She wasn't wrong. Then came the breaking point, a cold slap of betrayal that turned simmering tension into a roaring blaze. It was the Friday after Thanksgiving, the air sharp with winter's edge, when Mark and Greg took matters into their own hands. Fueled by booze and desperation, they roared up the mountain in Greg's hulking truck, an angle grinder humming in the back. The vacation home sat silent, its windows dark, guarded by a sturdy gate Tom had locked months ago. That didn't stop them. With a screech of metal on metal, they sliced through the chain, the gate groaning as it buckled under their assault. They didn't stop there. Mark attacked the front door, gouging the wood and mangling the lock set, while Greg bashed through the utility entrance, splintering an inner door like it was kindling. They even tore into the barn, though God knows why, maybe eyeing the 6-seater mule Tom had stashed there years back. They might have gotten away with it, too, if not for James, the property manager Tom had hired, a former city cop turned mountain hermit. James kept watch over the place with a quiet diligence, his service dog trotting at his side. He'd rigged cameras, high-tech eyes peering over the valley, and when the alerts pinged his phone, he saw it all. The truck, the grinder, the reckless rampage. Without a beat, he dialed the sheriff's deputies, friends he'd made over years of coffee and backroad chats. By the time Mark and Greg stumbled out the front door, dusting off their hands like they'd won some twisted prize, flashing lights greeted them. Deputies swarmed, cuffs clicking, voices barking orders. The brothers-in-law tried to spin a tale, something about family rights, but the cameras didn't lie, and neither did the wreckage. They were hauled off, charged with breaking and entering, destruction of property, and tossing out threats like confetti as they went. Word reached Tom late that night, shattering a peaceful day with Laura's folks. They'd left their phones in the car, savoring a rare unplugging, only to find a flood of missed calls. James, the sheriff's office, even his rattled parents. Laura scrolled through the voicemails, her face tightening with each one. They broke in, she said, voice flat with disbelief. Tom's jaw locked, a slow burn spreading through him. James filled in the details over a crackling call. the gate in tatters, the doors scarred, the barn breached. "Caught 'em red-handed," he said. His tone steady but grim. "They were yelling about beating you senseless. Dumbasses said it right in front of the cops." Tom thanked him, hung up, and called the sheriff's office himself. "No mistake here," he told them, his words ice cold. They had no right. "Press every charge you've got." Back at his parents' house, the fallout hit hard. Claire and Julia had spun a frantic web, pleading with Mom and Dad to call it a misunderstanding, to beg Tom for mercy. His mom's voice trembled over the phone the next day, tears choking her words. Their family, "Tom, can't we fix this?" His dad, usually a rock, sounded hollow. They should pay for it. But maybe a fresh start? Tom listened, his chest tight, but he wouldn't budge. "Not until every dime's covered," he said. "This isn't just a mess, it's betrayal." He hung up, the silence heavy. Laura stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder. "They've gone too far," she whispered. He nodded, staring out at the dusk. Too far didn't even cover it. The truth unraveled in the days that followed, peeling back layers of greed Tom hadn't seen coming. His parents confessed. Claire had been renting the place out for 3 years, weekends at $2. Weeks at $4. Fursu, pocketing it all behind their backs. Julia knew, maybe even dipped her hands in too. They'd lived high, big trucks, jet skis, while crying broke to Mom and Dad, who couldn't loan them a cent. Tom's gift, meant for quiet retreats, had become their side hustle. The revelation hit like a punch. His sisters weren't just entitled. They were thieves. Mark and Greg's break-in wasn't impulse. It was a desperate grab to keep the cash flowing, maybe for hunting trips or more rentals. Deer season stretched ahead, and that house slept plenty. Tom dug in his heels. No mercy, no compromise, not yet. The law hummed alongside him, charges stacking like firewood. His parents wavered, caught between love and disgust. But Tom saw it clear. This was war now, and he wasn't backing down. The mountain air turned brittle as December crept in, a chill settling over the wreckage of Tom Bennett's once peaceful world. The vacation home, his parents' retreat, his generous burden, stood scarred and silent, a monument to the greed that had torn his family apart. Mark and Greg's break-in had lit the fuse, and the explosion of charges, breaking and entering, property damage, threats, still echoed through the sheriff's reports. Tom carried the weight of it all, a slow simmer of fury and exhaustion. Laura stood by him, her usual warmth dulled by the mess, her voice quiet but firm. This ends now. She was right. But endings, Tom learned, rarely came clean. Days after the arrests, the storm shifted. Claire and Julia clung to their old playbook, tears. Please! Pressure on their parents to smooth things over. Tom's mom called daily, her voice fraying like threadbare cloth. They're sorry. Tom, they're scared, she'd say, each word a plea for the son she'd raised to fix things. His dad, gruffer but shaken, muttered about consequences one minute, reconciliation the next. Tom listened, his patience a thin wire stretched to snapping. He'd told them full payment or nothing. No shortcuts. No forgiveness. Not after they'd turned his gift into a cash cow behind his back. The betrayal stung deeper than the splintered doors. It was a knife twisted by years of envy he'd pretended not to see. Then, on a gray Thursday afternoon, a courier knocked at Tom's office door. Inside the envelope, a letter, scrawled signatures from Mark and Greg, and a cashier's check for $5. Nah. The words spilled out in shaky ink. Admissions of guilt, promises to steer clear of the mountain house unless invited, a desperate beg to drop the charges. They'd lose jobs. They wrote, Greg's security clearance hung by a thread. Mark's bravado couldn't shield him from the fallout. It was a groveling pivot, a stark U-turn from their snarling defiance. Tom stared at the paper, the numbers, the weight of it all. Laura read it over his shoulder, her breath catching. They mean it this time, she said, half questioning. Tom didn't answer, just handed it to his lawyer, a sharp-eyed man named Carter who'd seen worse family wars than this. Carter laid it out over a 2-hour meeting, his office a clutter of files and coffee stains. You could sue, he said, leaning back. You'd win. Years of rentals, damages, emotional toll, but it'd drag on. Cost you upfront, and they might never pay up. He tapped the check. This? It's a start. Take it, settle, and lock them out for good. The deal he proposed was a steel trap. They'd pay repairs and fees, sign a no-contact pact, civil restraining order in all but name, and Tom could wash his hands of it. No courtroom circus, no endless bleed. James, the property manager, pegged fixes at 4-0, mostly the front door's ruin. Tom nodded, the math clicking into place. Make it airtight, he told Carter. I'm done bleeding for them. The next day, Carter called Mark and Greg, laying out the terms with a lawyer's cool edge. They squirmed. Greg admitted they could afford damages or a lawyer. Not both. Mark grumbled but folded. No defense. No fight left. They agreed, voices flat with defeat. Carter pushed further, nudging the DA's office about dropping charges. They're paying? No priors, good chance most goes away, he told Tom, though he warned trespassing might stick. Drive up Monday, meet the prosecutor yourself. Seal it. Tom booked the trip, his mind churning. Was this relief or surrender? He couldn't tell anymore. By Monday, the deal thickened. Claire and Julia, dragged into it by their husband's mess, faced the full weight. Carter demanded $2, $500 more, $3 total, covering his fees. They balked, tried to haggle, but he shut it down cold. Sign as is, or we sue for every rental dime, every scratch, every hour Tom lost to this garbage. He said, your call. Silence. Then signatures tense. Bitter, done in a room thick with frost. Greg took charge, barking at the sisters to quit whining or he'd cut his own deal. They handed over another check, scraped together from somewhere, likely Greg's credit union. Tom guessed. No one smiled as they left. A cold truce carved in ink. Tom drove to the mountains that Tuesday, the road winding past skeletal trees. The vacation home greeted him with its wounds, gouged wood, twisted metal, a gate hanging like a broken jaw. His blood boiled anew. He paced the frost-crusted yard, fists clenched. Laura wasn't there to steady him, but a friend answered his call, enduring an hour of his raw venting. Let it go, the friend urged. You've won, Hattie. Tom grabbed a sandwich at a roadside diner, the food settling his nerves. At the DA's office, he met a harried assistant prosecutor. No appointment, just grit. They've paid. I'm done chasing, Tom said. She nodded. Charges dropped. Save trespassing. A Class 2 misdemeanor. A fine. A slap on the wrist if they behaved. They won't, she warned. If they push it. Tom thanked her. Then the sheriff's dispatch for their swift boots on the ground. Back home. Laura signed the papers beside him, her pen steady where his shook. The agreement locked it all. No contact unless through lawyers. They kept their rental profits, Tom's loan concession, barring tax headaches and mutual release from the chaos. Peace settled, fragile but real. His parents knew only vague outlines, working it out, he'd said. Claire and Julia's version, no doubt warped, wasn't his problem. The vacation home stayed. For now, his folks could use it. But Tom saw its future clear, sold when they were gone. A clean break from the past. Winter tightened its grip as Tom Bennett stood on the porch of the vacation home, the mountain air biting at his knuckles. The scars of Mark and Greg's rampage lingered, patched now, but still a quiet ache in the wood. The settlement was signed, the checks cashed, the law's grip loosened to a mere trespassing fine. Tom and Laura had carved out a fragile peace, a life unburdened by the clamor of Claire and Julia's greed. The sisters and their husbands faded into silence, their calls blocked, their shadows barred by ink and will. Yet the victory tasted less like triumph and more like ash, a bitter residue of a family unraveled. Tom's parents drifted in the aftermath, their voices softer when they spoke of Claire and Julia. They'd use the house still, they said, savoring its solitude when the dust fully settled. Tom nodded, letting them have it. For now. In his mind, the place was already a ghost, its future a for sale sign when they no longer climbed its steps. Laura stood beside him, her gaze tracing the valley below. "It's over," she said, a statement more than a question. Tom exhaled, the weight lifting but leaving a hollow. "Yeah, and good riddance." The lesson sank deep. Family wasn't a shield. It could be the sharpest blade. Letting go, he realized, was the only way to breathe again. The mountains stretched wide before him, whispering a truth he'd fought to see. Some bonds are worth more broken than whole. But as he turned away, a question lingered. Would Claire and Julia ever grasp what they'd lost? What about you? Have you ever had to cut ties to find peace? Or is family always worth the fight? Drop your thoughts below, hit like if this hit home, share it with someone who gets it, and subscribe to Heart Stories for more raw tales like this.